Breaking overnight, Russia launches its largest drone attack on Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Ukrainian officials say the massive aerial assault involved more than 700 drones, but it was largely repelled. Moscow's escalation follows a remarkable 48 hours in the White House, where President Trump yesterday vented his frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin, something you don't see that often.
We get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
Trump calling BS in that cabinet meeting. He also said Ukraine would have the weapons it needs to defend itself. It's a notable turn for the president. Just last week, his administration paused the delivery of some missiles to Ukraine. Our Caitlin Collins asked him about that yesterday.
Last week, the Pentagon paused some shipments of weapons to Ukraine. Did you approve of that pause?
We wanted to put defensive weapons because Putin is not treating human beings right. He's killing too many people. So we're sending some defensive weapons to Ukraine, and I've approved that.
So who ordered the pause last week?
I don't know. What did you tell me?
I think that's a question for the Pentagon.
Go ahead.
That was awkward because Pete Hegseth, his Secretary of Defense, was sitting right there with him. And new CNN reporting on what happened behind the scenes gives you some insight. Multiple sources telling CNN Hegseth did not give the White House a heads up before he authorized that pause on weapons shipments to Ukraine last week, and that the administration began scrambling after they found out. CNN's Zach Cohen has the new reporting for us from Washington. You helped break this story. What are you learning, and what the awkward moments as you're sitting there watching this play out, knowing the president apparently didn't have a clue that the pause happened at Hegseth's command?
Yeah, Sarah, it's pretty remarkable. Obviously, the Pentagon and White House not in lockstep over this decision to pause arms shipments to Ukraine. And it's an episode that really does underscore the haphazard policymaking process we've seen from the Trump administration, and specifically at the Department of Defense under Secretary Pete Hegseth. We're told that Hegseth did sign off on this pause, but failed to mention that to the White House, which, like a lot of other top officials in the Trump administration, learned about it after the fact. And as we saw yesterday, the president not only reversed that decision, but still really distancing himself from the move, the temporary pause of those shipments, which really does not align with sort of the rhetoric that we're hearing from him in recent days, this frustration with Vladimir Putin and this pledge to Volodymyr Zelensky to continue to provide support to the Ukrainians. Now, look, this is something that did originate from a conversation that we're told happened last month at the NATO summit, where Trump ordered Hegseth to conduct a review of the U.S. weapons stockpile. Obviously, multiple ongoing conflicts around the world. Trump wanted to make sure that there were enough U.S. weapons to provide support across the board. But Hegseth, at the recommendation of some of his top officials at the Department of Defense, ultimately conducted that review and also paused arms shipments to Ukraine as a result. That's not something that the president directed Hegseth to do, and it's something that caused frustration at all corners of the Trump administration. Now, we asked the White House and the Department of Defense for comment. A spokesperson for the Pentagon said, quote, Secretary Hegseth provided a framework for the president to evaluate military aid shipments and assess existing stockpiles. This effort was coordinated across the government. Obviously, that doesn't address, though, this decision to pause the arms shipments to Ukraine, and again, one that Trump has very publicly reversed and is still facing questions about today.
Yeah, the big question is who did decide this, and was this a plan across the Defense Department, the Pentagon? We just don't know at this point, but your reporting is really telling, Zach Cohen. Thank you so much to you and Natasha for that.
The shipment of weapons to Ukraine has been contested over the last week. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth authorized a pause on weapons shipments to Ukraine just last Wednesday, apparently without telling the White House. That's according to 5 sources familiar with the matter. Hegseth's decision created chaos in the administration as officials tried to figure out why the halt was implemented. Listen to this exchange between President Trump and CNN's Caitlin Collins about who is responsible.
Putin is not treating human beings right. He's killing too many people. So we're sending some defensive weapons to Ukraine, and I've approved that.
So who ordered the pause last week?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
Joining me now to discuss, Margaret Talev, senior contributor at Axios, Haima Moore, former chief of staff to DNC chair Jamie Harrison, and Doug Heye, former RNC communications director. Doug, I'm actually going to start with you because this feels like it's also about communication and maybe lack thereof. What do you see in this moment? Because he has totally had Hegseth's back throughout all the last couple of months. And what do you think happened here?
I'm reminded of what Yogi Berra said. It's deja vu all over again. And when we've seen problems within the administration from the cabinet, it always comes from DOD. We don't have these conversations about the Department of Labor, the Department of Transportation. It's always DOD. And so we've seen Hegseth cause political headaches for Donald Trump. And in any administration, this kind of lack of communication with a president who values communication, maybe in a different way than his predecessors, but also more than all of his predecessors, we know that that's a fireable offense. And when Donald Trump is your firer-in-chief, we all know him because he said that phrase, "you're fired." At some point, we have to wonder if the branch is going to break there, because this is just absolutely out of bounds for what a DOD secretary should do to make sure that his president does not know on something this major is happening.
Yeah.
Look, if this was a Democrat and Joe Biden was president, I think the Republicans in the Senate would have a huge fit. So look at this. Thom Tillis in North Carolina just decided not to run for re-election. He voted for Hegseth to become the Secretary of Defense. I think there are a lot of Republicans right now who are questioning that vote. But to your point, this is just basic on the job, being good at your job. If you can't inform your manager that you're going to do something, that's a problem. And so I think at some point, Donald Trump, the president's going to get really upset about having these bad headlines. Hegseth is on TV every day. He's out there every day, and he has been a good messenger for the president on many issues, but right now he's causing too much trouble for the president.
The other thing that's intriguing, of course, is this is happening in this moment where we're seeing the president really look at Vladimir Putin. And he even he says flattering things, which I think a lot of people assumed what was going on. And now it seems like the president is not necessarily believing it. What else is significant about this moment to you?
It may be a turning point. I think we just don't know yet. If you're Volodymyr Zelensky, your thought bubble on all this is like,
Finally?
yeah. And so I think part of this is clearly there's dysfunction in Hegseth's office. There's been a lot of departures. It's hard to know whether he's really sort of in command of his own staff or aware of his own staff. Second sort of tier is this is certainly the advisors who are still there have an agenda, and it's not a pro-Ukrainian or pro-U.S. support of robust support of Ukraine agenda. So there is a question about whether Hegseth is totally calling the policy shots in his shop. But I think the third piece of it is that there have been mixed signals from President Trump about what his posture toward support of Ukraine and towards drawing hard lines against Vladimir Putin is. And if he is at a turning point now, that may change his approach going forward. But I think if you were Putin watching Trump for the last, 8 years, but certainly the last since he re-entered office, you also are trying to figure out what the boundaries are and testing those boundaries right now.
Okay.
And speaking of boundaries, this isn't just about Ukraine. If you talk to the countries that neighbor Russia, they'll tell you they're very nervous. Every fall I speak at the Polish Economic Forum, and when you get off the plane in Poland, it is real very quickly. That's true in Latvia and Estonia and so on as well.
Yeah.